Hey everyone, this is Eve Picker, and if you listen to this podcast series, you're going to learn how to make some change. Thanks so much for joining us on this podcast. I'm Eve Picker, and my life revolves around cities, real estate, and crowdfunding. In this podcast series, we'll be digging deep to discover how we can build better cities by building better buildings. Jonathan Tate is my guest today. I met Jonathan through my crowdfunding platform, Small Change, where he's listed a couple of his projects in New Orleans. Jonathan's architectural practice focuses on architecture, planning, and odd opportunities, such as what to do with odd-shaped lots that no one knows what to do with in New Orleans. I find that immensely appealing, and so do lots of other people. Jonathan has received awards and press ranging from Curbed to Fast Company. He's a rising star. If you want to know more about Jonathan after you've listened to this podcast, please visit evepicker.com, where you'll find links and other goodies on the show notes page, and where you can subscribe to my newsletter on all things real estate impact. So, Jonathan, what's your background and what path led you to where you are today with your practice in New Orleans?
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk to you today. See if I can answer the question in terms of background. It's I don't know how far to go back, but it might help just to say that just started off actually in architecture what I would say is a world-class practice, but a very conventional practice. We were located in Memphis, Tennessee, and then in 2005, after Katrina in New Orleans, we relocated to the city. Roughly speaking, it was more like 2008 for me to move down here, and through that process, and then additionally with the recession, and then additionally I was teaching at the time. It just I don't know. That's sort of the origins of how our practice became our practice, is what I'd say. At least those are sort of the pieces that all added up to our kind of, multifaceted focus as an office. And so the lineage being, exposure to New Orleans in a recovery standpoint, trying to assist in that recovery, but also in academia where research and sort of engagement in topics that were sort of extra architecture in a way, all led to the establishment of our practice today, which tries to focus both on architecture, so making buildings, but also all the other things surrounding what it takes to put together a building or a city or you name it. So that's kind of where we came from.
So what prompted you to move to New Orleans? Like I know we have Katrina, but why move your office there? What were you hoping that would accomplish?
Well, the thing is, Memphis is close but really far away at the same time. We were in a state with a practice where we were busy. This was, again, it's 05 and this rolled into 06, 07. We were busy, but not that busy, and we were trying to kind of recalibrate and spin up a little bit just to drive in, or anyway, focus on things that we cared more about and less about just staying busy. And then comes Katrina, and we just wanted to help, right? There's a kinship with the city. We were, both along the river. We've spent, a lot of us in the office had sort of grown up coming down here, and we really got wrapped up in what was happening and wanted to help, basically. And we were invited by a number of different people to speculate on what we thought the future of the city was. And again, we were doing this from afar. And an opportunity arose for my partner at the time to be able to move down to New Orleans and do a sort of visiting teaching position at the university here at Tulane. And that was kind of our segue to making a decision just to move everything down. I mean, we, through this process, kind of recognized that there was only so much we could do in this environment, being, again, away in another city. So having a chance to kind of be on the ground and see if we could really have an impact, that was important to us. So we were able to act on that. And then eventually we moved so he came down, and then eventually we decided to move the entire office down. So
has it played out that way? Do you think the work that you're doing intersects with impact and socially responsible work in New Orleans? How do you think you're in your little practice helping the city?
Well, yeah, I do believe that it does, but in different ways is what I'd say. I wouldn't say it's more nuanced. It's just that it's not always, I mean, frankly, it's over 10 years now. The city's kind of, past the recovery mode, forgive me for saying, but there's still things that need to be resolved that were consequences of the storm. But what I would say more importantly, and back to your original question, is like there's an ethos about how you engage in urbanization and in the city, and how an architect can participate in that discussion and contribute. And that ethos is what's really in the office, whether what we're doing specifically relates to recovery or whatever. It's, I'd say, more the spirit of that, and being here at that time, shortly after the storm, and just seeing the energy in the architectural, and planning community, and how there was, a lot of ideas and vitality, and just a real commitment to try to make, this place survive, right, and be greater than it was. So that spirit, again, sorry for using these terms, but that I'd say that spirit sort of has infused the office in a lot of ways, and it's still, as a lot of people in New Orleans, connect and resonate on that level. But it's definitely, a part of and embodied in our office. So for sure.
Be sure to go to evepicker.com and sign up for my free educational newsletter about impact real estate investing. You'll be among the first to hear about new projects you can invest in. That's evepicker.com. Thanks so much. So do you want to just tell us quickly about a couple of projects that you think kind of embody impactful real estate projects that you're working on? I know about them, but our listeners don't. So I can explain a couple of things you're working on.
Sure. There's actually a couple of projects, and I should say, like, as an office, we have plenty of, like, here we just do work for people, and I love all the work that we do for people, and I love all our clients. It's fantastic. But running parallel to that, we have projects that are self-starters. Let's say that projects that we've initiated either through partnerships with people or on our own. And those are the ones that I generally talk about when we're having this kind of a conversation. So I'll sort of start there. And the one would certainly be our housing program, which we've dubbed the starter home with an asterisk, which is a infill. You mentioned in your intro, it's an infill housing development agenda, if you will, a strategy, a project, sort of with a capital P, where what we've done was formulate a position about a need for a particular type of housing in New Orleans. And this is topical, by the way. I think as we framed it, it's applicable in any city in the U.S., or at least in the American context, I think it's applicable anywhere. But in effect, we are looking for housing opportunities that were leveraging what we saw as underutilized property or land in urban, strictly city environments, and then trying to locate and design housing on these sites that were focused on either first-time home buyers or last-time home buyers, or anywhere really in between. But the idea about the housing is that it's sort of right size, so it's resisting the sort of bloat that we're seeing in the housing industry in general. And as a consequence, we're driving down some of the cost of the housing. Is by no means affordable, but it's certainly mid-market housing. And in that, we're trying to interject design and offer to the speculative buyer what we think is, quality contemporary work, right? Versus most speculative housing you're going to see, a trend or trend towards traditional, at least in single family housing. And so that project, again, the starter home project, is something we're really proud of, and that we've worked on for the last, it's going on 5 years now, basically. And we've managed to build, I think collectively we're at our 16th home. And the last ones were ones that we ran through small change. It was the first project that we worked with you on there. But along the way, we've done a number of different houses, and one that I'm starting to kind of look back on and think of, and more deeply anyways, is a project that we categorize under starter home, but it was something that we did for an individual who was formerly homeless. He had purchased himself a small lot, basically one of these little remnant parcels that I think in total it was about 800 square feet of land. I forget the exact number, but it's small. And we, with his help, designed a home for him. It's basically a micro house. It was at the time the smallest, I think it still is the smallest permitted home in the city of New Orleans. It was under 200 square feet, but we did it in a way that he could self-build it. So we sort of helped him with the construction. We created a set of documents that were permittable, but also something that he could actually go out and build by. And so we helped him in that process, kind of pulling that together. And that one's, weirdly enough, we don't promote it a lot, but it's one that has a lot of meaning for us. And it's getting a little bit of traction here in the city, just with people that are interested in looking at other housing, other ways to provide housing for people that aren't just building homes, but maybe, looking at a micro home and looking at, again, these small parcels. So that one was really interesting. Again, it's sort of under that framework of the starter housing. I can keep going. There's another project that or I can stop there.
No, go ahead. One more project.
Yeah. So the other one I'd say is another project that has been hosted on the Small Change site, and another self-initiated project, but it's one, it's actually, at least in theory, again, that we've come up with the idea and then formulate a building around the idea, but the idea being a cooperatively owned B&B that basically a hotel, or a small hotel in this case, where the operations are provided by the cooperative. The cooperative is made up of artists and other creative individuals that need time to do their work, but don't often have that time because they're too busy making money at a job, basically. And so the thought being is that we would create a cooperative. The cooperative would be the operations for the hotel, and then in return for your work at the hotel, you actually get room and board. And then, depending on how much you decide to work in the hotel, the theory goes is that you work one day a week. You may work a little bit more, you may work less, but the rest of that time, because you're not worried about where you have to live or where you're going to get your next meal, you're able to focus on and concentrate on your work. So that one's underway now, the one here, but we've already done one in Clarksville, Mississippi. So that one's up and operational, and it's sort of our model that we're translating down here. So those are two projects, I think that.
Yeah. So obviously you think socially responsible real estate is necessary. Do you see any current trends that interest you the most that might propel that type of real estate further? And maybe maybe another question I'll ask you also, or maybe this one comes first, is in your practice now, which do you prefer? Do you prefer doing these self-starter projects or working for your client?
That's a good question. I'd rather answer that one other than the trend. I'm terrible at trends. I get asked this. Yeah. So they, no good at predicting that, I should say. But in terms of like working with things, the truth is I go back and forth. It depends on what day of the week or what process or phase that it's in. I think what I enjoy most is that they both exist simultaneously, because it's, again, it can be a headache sometimes. I really do enjoy working with clients and other people and helping them with their vision. And I also really enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to kind of make some pivotal and essential decisions around the things that we do. Right. So it's not that I would say I prefer one or the other. What I prefer is that they both exist.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to retract the trend question, and I'm going to ask you if there's anything in the world of real estate that you're particularly interested in that's new that you're following. Let's not call it a trend.
Okay. What we are moving into and what we're trying to think about more and there's nothing new about this in some ways. It's just, I'm not sure that people have been critical about it in certain ways, is all this sort of mid-rise housing and the typology around multifamily housing these days, what we sort of colloquially would call a 4/2 or a 3/1 or whatever, but where you have a sort of base that's constructed non-combustible, which means it could be retail, it could be parking, it could be whatever. And on top of that, you've got, the obligatory 3-4 floors of housing that sit on top of it, which is the kind of building block of what we're seeing in cities now and have historically. But it is also, in our mind, leading to the homogenization of urban environments because it's become formulaic, right? And so what we're really digging into now, and again, this isn't a trend, this isn't necessarily anything new, is just we're starting to question what that is and how we can engage in that conversation and maybe turn it a little bit and see if there's a way to make a richer or get a richer project out of it.
So I think the other question I had is, do you think there are some trends, and I know you don't like that word, in real estate development that are really important for the future of our cities? In my world, it's funny. This is a question that, again, like it's hard for me to really answer in some ways because, believe it or not, and I often say this, it's like I don't see myself as a developer, at least not by definition, right? And what I mean by that is we're not really set up as a development practice per se. We do development, but we're not organized around development as a sort of business model. And so consequently, weirdly enough, I don't really follow development as much. Yeah. And so I don't pay attention to it probably the way that I should, but that's not to say we don't interact with it in interesting ways. Obviously, we've got clients that are developers aside from ourselves, and the thing, I mean, there's things that are floating around now. There's actually, honestly, a lot of people come to us to talk about, or a fair amount of people come to us with interest in and want to discuss crowdfunding. So, the world that you're in is certainly of a lot of interest. And I think people are trying to figure out how to utilize that as a tool. Lately, Opportunity Zone seems to be the thing that everyone wants to hear about. Those are financial trends and what people are starting to focus on. I think your earlier question about any sort of social minded real estate development, it's sort of there in our world. Like we don't see, you see a little bit of it, but you don't see a lot of it. It certainly doesn't feel like a trend, unfortunately. I think if you think about it, like crowdfunding is for us raising equity through a crowd, but co-working has had a meteoric rise where people share office space and share amenities because it's flexible and it allows them to move around and it allows them not to put down a lot of money on the space they may not need. And the same is going to happen with housing, right? We're seeing housing and we're seeing all sorts of new versions of living and working together that didn't exist maybe 10 years ago. So, and something we're starting to get, on that same track, something that we've started to engage with a little bit in a couple of different cities now, are the role of the food market as a incubator and a sort of jumping off point for, restaurant entrepreneurs. So that's a whole nother model that seems to be proliferating wherever we go these days. So that's right. So I think for me, what's interesting about that is that it allows places that don't have much activity or that someone may not go to open an office because it's a neighborhood that they're not sure about. But it allows that neighborhood to kind of gather people who are doing things, and that may begin sort of invigoration of that neighborhood. So if a nonprofit opens a co-working space, they're able to offer space to small businesses in the neighborhood who really have nowhere else to go. And now all of a sudden you have some sort of expression of what's actually happening in the neighborhood. And that's really interesting. I think that's
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and we're certainly seeing that, and I guess what I like about it, in addition to what you've described already, is the forefront of revitalization of a portion of a city, or at least that's one component of it. It also involves often non-developer types that are working towards these goals. And so I think by the time these kind of ideas make their way up and they become, again, formulaic in some ways, that's when developers feel like it's safe to take it on and implement different.
And that's why bankers feel it's safe to take it on. So
that's right.
We're sort of stuck in this circle of traditional financial institutions not wanting to fund the things that will eventually make the places we live better. And so someone has to kick that off, right? And that's you with your odd lots or me with my crowdfunding, but there have to be those early starters. Which I think brings me to my next question. How can we improve on that? Like, it is so hard, as you know, to do those little starter projects, and they really don't provide much financial return. We like doing them because they provide us some other sort of satisfaction, but how can we be better at incubating those sorts of ideas for our cities?
I think, one, you have to lead by example in a lot of ways. And that's certainly what we were trying to do. I mean, we had with the housing in particular, it's like there's no expectation that we were going to build thousands of units of housing, which we certainly need, like most cities, to help with a lot of issues, just availability, but also affordability. There's that. And so I think, providing some evidence that this is a thing that one can do. And then you see the adaptation of that and the adoption of that and how it can sort of roll through. I think, and when I fortunately find myself in these kind of conversations a lot are people that are interested in it, that just need some encouragement and some support. And if so, that said, as a way to make sure this continues to happen, or at least, facilitate this happening. I think creating, networks, collaborative networks where people can sort of call on one another for expertise or just general encouragement, as we're saying. It's like, I think that's an important thing, and that's a community, right? And that's what it takes for this to happen.
Yeah. I wish every city had a department of big ideas. And a little bit of money set aside for the projects which they kind of maybe turn their noses up at because they're small and they don't think they're important enough. But those little projects can sometimes have an enormous impact in an unexpected way. Like, one of the stories I like about you, Jonathan, is you created this whole thesis around odd-shaped forgotten and abandoned lots in New Orleans. And recently, didn't New York City run a little competition on odd-shaped lots? It took from you. How did that competition end up, and why did they do that?
Well, I definitely don't want to take credit for the idea there, but I think it actually, I followed it. We did not compete in it. We didn't submit anything for it, but I've certainly followed it. And I think, it ended up, they selected some winners, and we'll see if they're interested and want to actually construct the housing that's on there, or that they've proposed, let's say. It's, weirdly enough, I was having a conversation with a New York region developer early on. When I say early on in our process of building this housing, and they said to me, it's like, that's really fascinating, but it only works where you are or in similar sized cities. It doesn't make any sense in New York at all. And then, 3 years later, the city is saying, no, this is exactly what we should be doing with these lots. So, yeah.
Right. So another really great example of that is the Ciclovia that started in Bogota, Colombia. And I talked to the mayor, Penalosa, who started that. He said they had no operational funds, and it was really a question of whether they created the Ciclovia, which is like an open street, once a week for the residents of the city who were very poor and the city had many problems, or whether they paved the roads. And they chose to do this open street for the people instead. And the last time I looked, I think it was 100 miles long. Every Sunday, they close the streets and people go out there and run and bicycle and do lots of other things. But that idea has spread to practically every city in the world. It's had an astounding impact, just that idea. So, those little ideas.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, look at something like the High Line in New York as well. It's like I feel like every city is clamoring for their own version of that now too, because they just see how impactful and how it's making use of an abandoned resource, right?
Right.
So,
so maybe
so
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, that's part of this ethos as well. When we talk about the development or redevelopment of cities, it's like looking at things not as I don't know, refuse or eyesore or junk or waste or whatever you want to call it. It's just like there are opportunities all around us, and just understanding how to capitalize on those spaces, on those buildings, on those structures. It really takes, imagination, and that's really, I think, what we should be supporting and trying to cultivate. Right. So back to your idea of the Department of Big Ideas, like I think that's a great idea. So,
so in other words, use every corner of the city and don't waste it, because we've built infrastructure and we paid for it, and there are people there. And anyway, so I have to ask you: you've crowdfunded a couple of projects on our site, and I'm wondering what role you think that equity crowdfunding can play in building communities or building better communities.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, I have to say, I'm absolutely enamored with it as a process and as a platform and as a tool to help with development. The thing that I think it can do more of, and frankly, I haven't done a great job with our own raises, is how it might galvanize neighborhoods around development, right? And I think that's one of the principal aspirations of this is that everyone should be able to participate and be involved with the redevelopment of their own neighborhoods or their own community or their own city, and they should be able to support that in some ways. And again, here's a tool for us to use that would enable people to support and basically cast a vote for what they felt like were strong investments in their city, and that they see a benefit of that. And so that's where actually if or as the next raise comes, that's the thing it would be, for at least for us as a crowdfunding raise, it would be the thing that I'd want to try to focus on more of, is just how do we pull people into it that are directly impacted by it, right? And so that's where, again, that's what I see as like one of the great advantages of this, and just leveraging it and making people aware of it and sort of pulling them into the process. I think that's an important tool. So,
yeah. So I think other than raising money, as you said, it can galvanize a neighborhood, and it could provide proof to a zoning department that a project would go. I think there are maybe other things that we haven't thought out about that it could help with kind of the crowd, right?
So, and there again, it becomes emblematic, and you see it as like here's a test case, and it proves that it's right. It doesn't have to be grandiose. You don't need to raise $10 million. I think if it was a small project that a lot of people were able to participate in, then that's they have ownership. People around it have ownership, and that's great.
Right. So I suppose I have one wrap-up question. It's a big one, and that is, how do you think real estate development or architecture or thinking about cities could be improved in the U.S.?
Whoa, that's a big one. Let me think about that. Sort of going back to the comment that I made about mid-sized housing, if you asked me that question today, it's like I'm again, increasingly interested in, but also frustrated with the built environments that we're seeing, kind of rapidly expanding in most cities that reflect a kind of lack of imagination, or better yet, like the propensity for developers to sort of follow known models, right? So in this case, it's like we understand a certain kind of housing type. We're just going to build that because it's known and it's comfortable and we can rely on it. And I don't particularly care for the consequences of that in our cities, right? So it's, as things are popping up, we're losing characteristics and qualities of our urban environments that I think that make, going to Pittsburgh different than coming to New Orleans, right?
Right.
And, so I'd say that's the piece. Like, if we can start challenging the development community to think about things a little bit differently, or to try to localize a little bit more. I mean, I understand the economics around all of this and why it is what it is, but it's just sort of revealing what's happening now, just to acknowledge it, so that as we move forward, we could challenge some of those, preconditions a little bit and come up with work that feels like it is born out of the location that it belonged, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So maybe the most important thing you said is lead by example, because if you do some terrific projects, others will follow. As we saw, you tackled odd-shaped lots and New York City followed. So, perhaps the time lag's too long. Mm-hmm. But I think having creative people working on cities like you is absolutely essential. And I want to thank you for that. And
well, thank you.
So with that, let's wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure we're going to talk again.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
That was the amazing Jonathan Tate. Today, Jonathan gave me 3 great takeaways. First, to always lead by example. Second, that odd, forgotten things can have great value. And third, that it's worth looking beyond formulaic answers to solve tricky urban issues. What did you learn? You can read more about Jonathan on the show notes page for this podcast at evepicker.com. While you're there, please consider signing up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while making some change. Thanks so much for spending your time with Jonathan and I today. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.